Hello, this is Domenico with Easynomics, and we're going to go over the law of supply and aspects of profit maximization to understand the law of supply. So here we have uh, our market for outputs, graph A, and we're going to utilize this particular model to understand the entrepreneur and their drive to increase the quantity supplied of outputs as price rises, and vice versa. So the law of supply, as we see here, states that there is a positive relationship between the price of a particular good and the quantity supplied of that good over a particular period of time, ceteris paribus. So that law states that price and quantity supplied move in the same direction. If price rises, we would expect the quantity supplied to also rise. And if price falls, we would expect the quantity supplied to also fall. Why is that? Why is there that positive relationship between the two variables, the independent variable of price and the dependent variable of quantity supplied? Let's first understand this market. We're in the market for outputs, but in order to generate these outputs, we have to employ resources or inputs. So looking back at the circular flow, here we have the firm, and they seek to employ resources in the resource market, and those resources are offered by the household. So here we see this blue arrow highlighting that the household is motivated to provide their inputs, which are resources or factors of production, in order to generate some type of income. And the income that's generated by the household is, if the household owns land, then the household will generate rent when they offer it to the firm. If the household owns capital, then they will generate interest if they offer it to the firm. If the household owns labor, they will generate a wage. And if the household is actually the entrepreneur, they will generate profit. So households offer inputs in return to gain income in the form of rent, interest, wages, and in the case of the entrepreneur, profit. Those inputs go to the firm, and the firm utilizes land, capital, labor resources to generate some type of output. So here we see this blue arrow highlighting the outputs going into the product market, where consumers go to buy final goods and services. And they take those final goods and services back to the household for consumption. So looking here, income and costs. If firms employ resources, they are incurring costs. So let's understand that. Here we have graph A, again, the market for output. We're measuring price on the y-axis, price being the independent variable, and we're measuring the quantity, in this case, supplied of a good or service on the x-axis, which is the dependent variable. Now let's assume that the firm will generate outputs at Q1. They will want to produce this quantity of outputs, and they will need to incur or actually employ resources. So here we see the upward sloping S1 curve. This is representing the offering of land, which is an input by the household. So in the resource market, households are incentivized to offer their land resources as the value of those land resources goes up. Thus we see that upward trend. So if the rent being offered rises, then the household's motivated to increase the quantity supplied of that land resource to generate rent. Okay? In addition, the firm may need to employ capital resources. Capital resources are non-naturally occurring tools used for the production process. Land resources being naturally occurring, capital resources being not naturally occurring. So if the household owns capital, they're motivated to offer their capital resources if the value of the interest goes up. And as a result, we can see S2, the S2 curve is upward sloping as the household is motivated to offer an increase in the quantity supplied of their capital resources if the interest being offered is rising. That goes back to the household seeking to maximize its utility. In the resource market, they want to earn as much income as possible. At Q1, the firm is employing land resources at point A, and that incurs costs such as rent. So the distance between A and 0 is the value of rent, and the distance from B to A is the value of the interest being paid for the capital resources. And in addition, the firm will need to employ labor resources. And as wages rise, firms would increase their quantity of supply of labor. So at a quantity of Q1, the firm is incurring land costs in the form of rent, capital costs in the form of interest, and labor costs in the form of wages. All right, the distance from 0 to A being rent, A to B being interest, and B to C being the wages. Inputs plus labor inputs, the combination of land, capital, labor, organized by the entrepreneur to generate output. So S3 is the final goods and services being produced by the firm. These are their outputs. That is reflective of the cost or the marginal cost of production by incurring wage costs, interest costs, and rent costs. All right. So let's understand again this idea of price rising and the quantity supplied of outputs rising. So let's say we have a particular price set at P1. Here's the price of that final good and service. And at that price, the firm will increase their quantity of supplied along their output supply curve. They will increase their marginal cost of production, employing land resources, capital resources, labor resources, up to point C. Point C, they will stop to generate a quantity supplied at Q1. Where is the profit for the entrepreneur? We see the costs of production, rent, interest, wages. Where is the profit? Here we will see. Let's get rid of this. All right. So what is profit? It's a simple formula that you as IB students need to know. Profit, oops. It's a simple equation. It's equal to your revenue minus the costs of production, which we can see in the circular flow model right here. The revenue gained minus the cost, whatever's left over, becomes your profit. So at a quantity of Q1, we see that the firm at point C has incurred wage costs, interest costs, and rent costs. And price is their revenue. The price they charge per unit is their revenue, or their revenue on average per unit of the good or service sold. So revenue minus costs, the distance between the two is their profit. So let me go ahead and highlight that area. Here is, in theory, in this very simple model, where the profit would lie. And I'm going to label this point A. A, representing the surface area of this triangle, is the profit margin of the firm. S3 being their marginal cost of production, the additional cost of generating an additional unit of output, and price of P being their revenue. Price minus costs becomes the firm's profit, or the entrepreneur's profit. So the law of supply. Why would the firm increase their quantity supplied as price rises? We're going to assume that the objective of the firm is to maximize profit, to profit maximize, to generate the most amount of profit possible so that the entrepreneur can bring as much income back to their household. So let's take a look and see what happens when price rises. So let's say that price rises to P2. At P2, the firm should be incentivized to increase their quantity supplied. So they're moving up along their S3 curve, along their marginal cost of production curve, their supply curve, from point C, in this case, to point D. And as a result, the quantity demanded will increase from Q1 to Q2. Okay? So what happens to the firm's profits? They rise at a price of P2. Let's go ahead and fill in that area. Here, there's this additional area of profit to the firm for increasing their output from Q1 to Q2. Oops. Quantity supplied is rising as the price rises from P1 to P2. So I'm going to label this area B. Okay? So we can see that the profit margin for the entrepreneur increases. At a price of P1, the profit is equal to P1 minus the costs at Q1, the marginal cost. To keep that simple, let's just go ahead and say that profit in this model is equal to area A, right? It's equal to surface area A at P1. But then at P2, we can see that profit is now equal to areas A plus B, A plus B. So since areas A plus B are greater than A, the firm is generating more profit by increasing the quantity supplied from Q1 to Q2 along their marginal cost of production curve from point C to point D. So this explains the law of supply. And vice versa, if the price fell from P2 to P1, the firm would have the incentive to decrease their quantity supplied along their S3 curve, in this case, from point D to point C, to minimize their losses and to generate the most profit at Q1, which is area A. So they will have to fire the excess resources of labor, land, and rent from Q2 to Q1 to minimize their loss and maximize the profit at Q1. So the firm is very responsive to changes in price. As price rises, because of the opportunity to generate more profit, areas A plus B, they will increase their quantity supplied along the supply curve from point C to point D. And as a result, they will employ more resources, more labor, land, and capital resources. Their marginal costs of production goes up, but because the revenue is higher, revenue minus costs becomes their profit margin, or later we'll call this producer surplus. And vice versa, if price falls, firms will decrease their quantity supplied, fire excess resources, labor, land, and capital, minimize the loss, and maximize the profit at Q1 at that lower price of P1. Price or revenue minus cost becomes the profit. Again, the revenue minus the costs becomes the profit to the entrepreneur. In the next video, we're going to look at non-price determinants of supply. And we're also going to understand that if the firm seeks to maximize profit, they want to reduce their costs of production. They have the incentive to pay lower wages, pay lower interest and rent to, again, increase their profit. If they're able to reduce their cost of production from S3 to S2, then that's more profit to the firm. Lower costs with the higher revenue generates more profit. And this also helps us understand how some households become poor over time and how other households become richer over time. The entrepreneur seeking to maximize profit wants to reduce costs. And that means that the households that own rent, interest, and wages might be pressured to reduce their rent, interest, and wages if they're facing lots of competing resources in that resource market. All right, and the gap between rich and poor widens. All right, so hopefully that is a quick overview of the law of supply and the positive relationship between price and quantity supplied, and how firms are employing resources, labor, land, interest, and how those costs of production increase as they increase the quantity supplied, but they will do so because the price rises, generating more profit for the firm, enabling them to meet the objective of profit maximization. So below in the information section of this video, I'll provide an outline of these key concepts and an outline of kind of how to analyze this graph for a paper exam. And that's it. If you have any questions, don't forget to comment, and don't forget to subscribe and to like. Thank you so much.